Sara McFarland is one of those people who are doing everything fully enthusiastically, and one of those people who can actually give quite strength and empowerment for others to follow different paths and different routes. Sara has been trained as a Zen priest. She has done martial arts, but lately there are two lines or two things that she is doing the most. One of them is storytelling, and the other one is she is a wild mind guide with Animas Valley Institute. My name is Georgs Rubenis, and this is Conversations, Spiritual Practices, How to Find the Right One. Discussions and conversations with people about our choices, how we are gradually becoming more authentic beings. Well, hello, Sara.
Hi.
Yeah. Maybe you could a little bit explain about storytelling, why it is important. Because you know, nowadays there's so much information available. We can go to Netflix, we can watch YouTube, there's a lot of books available. But and storytelling is to some extent something very old-fashioned, very traditional way of giving some sort of information. Why it should be relevant in today?
Yeah, great question, thank you. So I understand stories as, like you said, very old ways of passing information, the oral tradition of humans, right? The way we pass information from one generation to the next, the way the traditions get shared. But also not only from the humans to the humans, but it's the stories of the land itself, the place that the people have lived and been in deep conversation and relationship with particular places. The voices of the land, of the earth itself, can be heard in the stories. And I like to think of them as maps to a way back in a way, but a way forward in another way, of how we might learn how to listen to the earth in a particular way, and we might learn how to listen to the kind of relationship we want to be in with earth. Stories shift consciousness out of this kind of consumerist, business as usual way of being into a more expanded consciousness, more magical kind of consciousness, where mystery is really close, where the gods, the powers that uphold the universe, you know, are close, and we're hearing their whispers in the stories. So when I tell stories, it's very much about, actually I'm listening. I'm not telling a story like how you would read it in a book, fixed in one way of reading it, and it's always the same. But when I'm telling a story, I'm actually listening. I don't know how the story is going to be told through me, how the earth, how the place, how the people I'm with are calling forth the story in a particular way. So the bones are there, you know, of the traditional story, but the flesh of it is coming through in the moment.
So today we are actually also there's possibility to read all those different stories. And how would a reading story would differ from hearing one from storyteller?
Well, maybe you can answer that better. You heard me tell a couple days ago. Well, I think one of the things is that which I just said, that when we read a story, it's always the same. And of course, there can be goodness in that. We can read the story and we can take it with us and keep returning to it, you know, like an old friend, or like, you know, a bedtime story that our grandmother might tell us, you know. But when we hear a story, the now, the aliveness of the now, of the human, of the other than human, of this time and this place, becomes alive. So we're hearing a story, it's like a gift, you know, it's like a dream that we have at night. When we hear the story told by a person, it's almost like a dream we're having at night, that it's coming from somewhere. And we don't know where, but there's some kind of aliveness and some kind of magic in it that's different than this world. And if we're reading it, we're still oftentimes, you know, in this linear visual kind of way of reading. But when we hear it, everything comes alive.
Have you, have you a little bit tell about what's your own experience with stories, and why do you find it important for yourself, not only for the ones who are listening?
Yeah, so one of my most favorite memories is as a child. There was a nature center, a place where there was like exhibits about the ecosystem that I lived in. I lived on the shores of the ocean in the United States on the East Coast, and so there were all different information about the forests and the beaches and the sea, and they had a storyteller. I think I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, and I remember being completely captivated and like brought into a world of magic by this storyteller. That something in me woke up in a really different way than if I were to watch a movie or read books, both of which I also love to do because they're also somehow stories. I love stories. Humans are storytelling creatures. Our whole day is filled with stories. Facebook is stories, Twitter is stories, Instagram, videos, that's what we do the whole day is we tell stories or we listen to stories. But for me, the storytelling it's a portal. It's like a doorway into a different kind of a different way of being in the world that makes the kind of the kind of magical possibilities real. Tables can fill themselves with food, and donkeys can this is one of the stories that I love from the storyteller, where the table, you would say the magic phrase and the table would fill with food. You'd say the magic phrase and the donkey would pour gold out of their mouth. There was a club, you'd say the magic phrase and it would beat your enemies. Right, so what kind of imaginal world, does that create? And there's something about, I don't really know how to put language on it, but there's something about the heart-to-heart transmission, that it's being spoken a lot like live by a human. It touches the heart in a different way. So when I listen to storytellers, through my heart, I'm transported into this other world. I think that's the thing that's the most important to me, most meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, in our culture, in the Western culture, usually we have used to that stories and tales are more meant for children. And youngsters, because adults need to be serious, important, do all the daily jobs and daily tasks. And have you noticed and have you seen, is there some sort of reclaiming happening of the stories and tales also in the adult world?
Yeah, adults love stories. Mostly I tell for adults, and it's beautiful to watch the eyes, the child's eyes awaken in them, or the sitting on the edge of the seat. What will happen? The kind of joy and aliveness that moves through the adults when they're suddenly like their children sitting there again. I think there's something that we're hungry for about that. I think I live in Germany, and the stories of the Brothers Grimm, have this really deep tradition in their culture. And they love it, they just want to hear those stories from their own childhood. So yeah, I would say that there's a reclaiming, or what's the other word? Like a revitalization of stories and storytelling. Yeah.
You are doing also those storytelling not only in live in places like this, but also you are doing this online. And how it differs, or can a listener experience similar things by listening a story online? Yeah,
great question. Surprisingly, it works well. I started during COVID, like so many of us, to do things online. I started a monthly storytelling, which is still going on. And I call them soul stories. And so the people who come are listening in a particular way. They're longing for the depths in a particular way. I think the important thing of doing it online is how we threshold it. How we create or invite the people in, and then how I catch them at the end out of the story. The story itself, when I'm telling, I'm drumming and I'm speaking. I ask them to turn off their videos. They lay down or they snuggle themselves on their couch, and they go on the journey. But I think the difference is it needs a particular kind of inviting them in to a kind of consciousness that they're open for it, that they're ready for it. But it works surprisingly well. They go very deep. Yeah.
What would be your suggestion for people who are now listening this and are thinking, oh well, okay, so maybe yes, maybe it is truth. If I recall my childhood regarding all those experiences and different feelings about stories, what would be a good way today for an adult who would like to dig deep in those stories and to re-experience those things? How to do that for himself or herself?
Yeah. Well, obviously find somebody who's telling stories. If there is one, in your area. There's, in many places there are storytellers. There is this revival going on, and there are people who tell stories, both live and online. Obviously people can come to my online sessions. So one thing is to listen to stories. The other is, even though they're in books, to read them, and read them out loud to each other. Adults reading them to children, but also adults reading them to adults. And another invitation, of course, inspired by the Animist work especially, is to read the story and then go out for a walk into a wildish place and tell the story out loud, sort of to yourself and to the trees and beings that are there, and overhear yourself. You won't tell it exactly the way it's written, but you might be surprised by the real truth that comes through in that moment, the thing your heart needs to hear, the thing your heart needs to say. Stories have a really beautiful way of giving us the words that we don't have, to feel our feelings or to recognize what's happening in our lives. They're, again, like maps. So stories, if you feel drawn to a particular story, read it, draw it, collage it, dance it, tell it outside in the wild places. Really receive that story in as many ways as possible, to let it live within you like a friend or a teacher or guide.
Yeah, I have spoken about several people about stories and mostly fairy tales. And it's what sometimes comes up is that for some part of adults there's some sort of deep resistance against stories. And it's not only because they're mentioning those names that fairy tales and stories are childish and that there's something from early childhood and so on, but I've even spoken with some adults who have small children, and they say or mention that, well, actually when I'm going to a cinema or showing my children maybe Disney movie or something, I can't stand myself to watch it. Have you had similar experiences with some adults, and if yes, so maybe can you a little bit tell about how to maybe overcome such situations, or maybe how to start to befriend the tales?
Yeah. Well, I haven't had that experience with people, because usually the folks who come to hear my stories want to hear the stories. But of course, the first thing I'd be curious about is how's their relationship with their own inner child? How's their relationship with fantasy, with their imagination, which is not the same as fantasy. Fantasy is an escape, a way of checking out, and imagination is a deep way of being in the present, in all of, in a different way. Right? Sometimes we say the dreaming of earth. And folk tales or fairy tales are one doorway into the dreaming of earth, into the dreaming of this place, right? This wave being. So, of course, I would want to know what the resistance is, what the, what it is that bothers them so much. If they seem childish and stupid and, a waste of time, when did they stop believing in magic? When did they stop seeing the world as a miracle? When did they stop playing? When did they stop letting themselves be touched, their hearts be touched by the wonder of this life? God, this world is a beautiful, beautiful world. One flower, is an entire cosmos is within one flower. And if we really look at this one flower, breaks our hearts open. So I would get curious about, when that happened in their lives and how they might rediscover their enchantment with the world. And stories, of course, are one way to re-enchant yourself, re-enchant the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you already mentioned Anim's work, and you mentioned also several not definitions, but terms that are used by Animas. So inner child and imagination and all those things. And so you have just finished this 5-day wildland program here in Lūžņa in the Stacija. And partly we also spend those days by exploring those areas. Could you a little bit maybe tell and explain about it, how this specific storytelling goes together with things that you are doing with Animas Valley Institute?
Yeah. Somebody asked me something similar a couple of days ago. I think the essence is consciousness shifting. What we call eco-awakening or ecological belonging or awakening to our belonging to Earth. Recognizing ourselves as humans as a part of nature, that we're not separate from nature, that there is only nature and we are part of it. And that the kind of consciousness that can experience that is the same kind of consciousness that happens through storytelling or listening to stories. And it's the same kind of consciousness when we do this work. We're inviting people to go out and be in conversation with the world, which sounds crazy to a lot of people. What do you mean, go talk with a tree? But in a story, that's what people do, right? They're having a problem, like in Baba Yaga, Vasilisa and Baba Yaga, this Russian fairy tale. She has to sort a pile of earth that has poppy seeds in it. That's one of the tasks that Baba Yaga gives her. And no, it's not humanly possible in one day to sort this whole pile of earth and poppy seeds. And so the birds come from the forest and they help her, or in some versions of the story it's mice, and they help her separate the earth from the poppy seeds. And she's in conversation with those ones. She asks for help, the doll in her pocket, she asks for help, and the wild ones come and they help. So that's actually how it is, right? It's just a fairy story, but it's also how it is, that when we go out into the world, we're surrounded by sentient beings. Humans are not the only ones with consciousness, which some people don't experience, It's not a very scientific way of looking at the world. But for 99% of our humanity, which is where the stories come from, that kind of consciousness, this is what we knew. We knew we shared this place with bear and squirrel and eagle and birch tree and linden and oak. Here in Latvia, the oak is the masculine principle and the linden is the feminine principle. Well, that comes from somewhere. It comes because there was conversation and relationship with oak as the father or as the masculine, and there was conversation with linden as the feminine, as mother, right? So these roots are very, very deep in our consciousness. that the whole world is alive and speaking with us. So in the animist work, that's what we do. We go out and are in conversation with the wild world. And again, the story can be a map of how to do that. I'm having trouble. I'm in front of a problem I can't solve. It's not possible for me to do it alone. Help, help mystery, help life, help world. The doll in our pockets, right? And we receive the help that we need. It might be physical birds, it might be imaginal birds, it might be something else altogether, but yeah.
Several times during those last 5 days, I'm not quoting you exactly, but the thing that you mentioned, or the idea or thought that you mentioned, was that quite often different images that are coming into our consciousness might reveal something about ourselves that we are not able to express in scientific words, let's call it that. So could it be so that engaging with the stories and with this metaphorical area, or with those metaphors, could also help people something understand and name about themselves?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes we can only point at something or describe the neighborhood, you know, something about it. It's too numinous. Numinous means filled with the divine, or you know, with spirit, too filled with spirit to be able to, it's not in the ordinary world. You know, how do you talk about something like that? Or how do you talk about a feeling or an experience in your own psyche, or a dream? Sometimes there's no way to put scientific language on that, right? So we reach for metaphor. We reach for an image. It might be an image of a tree or a plant or an animal. A dream image might come. You know, we might have dreamt of a bear. So it's sort of like there's these two sides of the story. We can use myth or folk tale or fairy story as a way of explaining or understanding, as a metaphor for our own experience. But there's also the real, and as we've experienced these last days, the real transformational power of telling our own stories. The sharing what is within us, sharing the experiences we have out on the land with the wild ones, with other humans, and being heard and seen, being witnessed, as we bring our stories back from the wild or from doing dream work. Sharing those stories, those personal stories, is transformational, both in the way that we understand ourselves, in the ways that we understand ourselves to be transforming and becoming, can be very healing. And, as you're pointing to as well, kind of like, oh, there's parts of myself I've never met before, and I'm so much bigger than I thought I was. Or I'm so much deeper and more resourced than I thought I was. Oh, I didn't know I had one in me who loves to sing, or who, you know, loves to, in the forest, loves to sing with the birds. You know, oh, I didn't know I had one of those in me. Wow, what a feeling of joy and freedom and praise. You know, oh, I had no idea. Right?
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about maybe yourself? Have you had such an experience that by naming some things in a metaphoric or image, what's cooking inside you have helped for you to maybe, I don't know, reclaim some part of you, or maybe to feel this empowerment and this sense that I'm something more?
Right. You said at the very beginning also our conversation is about the search for the authentic life, right?
Yeah.
So listening for the authentic voice, or you know, who am I, right? Yeah, let me just think for a moment what experience I might share, what story I might share. It's quite a vulnerable and tender story for me, but this is the one that's coming. So I had a brother when I was born. I was a twin, and my brother died just after birth. And I spent a long time feeling very guilty that I had survived and he had died. And I didn't really know how to make sense of that. I felt like I had to be making up for that my whole life. You know, I had to be kind of proving I'm a good person my whole life to make up for that mistake I had made when I was just born, you know. And I remember being in Arizona, in the southwest of the United States. I think you've been there too, to Aravaipa. Have you been there at the retreat center in Arizona? No. So it's a place that's in a desert of cactus, or a forest of cactus, sorry. Desert, and these saguaro cactus that have the arms like this, and the ones that have, you know, paddles that come out and flowers at the end, and deer live there, and mountain lion live there, and there's canyons where the water has flown, but there is no water anymore. You can just see how the water has sculpted the stone. And then mountains, cliffs, really beautiful place. And I followed the way that the water had flown down over in this particular canyon. And at that time in my life, there was something in me that really wanted to follow these tracks of where water had been. And it touched me somehow, and I started to weep. My own tears, you know, started to flow as I was walking this path that the water had created up to the beginning, up to its source. And I walked up to the top of this one little hill, having followed the canyon, the water canyon up. And I looked out over the desert, and I looked out over this vast space. And I began to speak with my brother. And I began to the skies and to the earth and to all the beings there. And I told the story of my birth and what had happened. And I told my brother the story, and I told the world the story. And somehow in the telling of it, something shifted in me, in my capacity to hold the story, like in the space inside of me. It grew bigger, and I wasn't closed up around this idea of it being my fault anymore. There suddenly was space around it. And I remember being on the top of that hill and telling the story, and I was finished with the story. And just as I finished, the light shifted in a particular way through clouds, and it hit me in the face. It had been sort of cloudy, and the light hit me in the face, and in the heart and in the body, and I had this sense of the way that I had been shaped, like the water shapes the land. I had this sense of the way I had been shaped by this story of my life. And now the space that had been made, just like the water carves the emptiness, the space into the hillside. And I could feel the way that I had been carved by this. And there was something about the tears that then flowed that were so healing. They weren't tears of guilt anymore. They weren't tears of like, I'm a bad person. Suddenly it was, what an honor and a responsibility to bring this story differently into the world. And so I promised with each step as I went down the mountain to let the story transform inside of me, that it wasn't anymore about me being guilty, but that I had been shaped by this story in a particular way. And with each step I said yes to being that one that could feel something in a particular way that would be of use in the world, that might be healing in the world. And there's just the little last coda. You know, when we do these kinds of things, oftentimes always the world responds. So I went through this journey, and I went to sleep. And in the morning, just as the light was coming, before sunrise, very visionary time, right? I had a dream in which I was standing across from my brother, and there was this ancient old woman next to us, sort of wrapped in, she was sitting, sort of wrapped in her skirts and her shawls, like, such a wrinkled, ancient face. Kind, beautiful, wise eyes. And I stood there across from my brother, and my heart was in his chest, and in my chest was a star. And I woke up, and I was sleeping out under the stars that night. And I woke up, and I stood up and embodied this dream image, as we often do in this work, right? And I looked as if my brother were standing across from me and this old one was there. In my imagination, I saw my heart and I felt the star. And as soon as I took that place, my heart flew back into my chest and the star flew back into him. And I saw the morning star up in the sky, right? So now I get chills when I say that. So those kinds of stories, are healing stories. They're magical stories, and they're real, right? It's just like, the stories where people change shape and transform into other creatures, and receive healing elixirs, get their lives saved by the waters of life, right?
Yeah, beautiful and intimate story. Thank you for sharing it. Yeah. Mostly when we are looking back at other adults and people, we sometimes are living in some sort of expectations. And so looking back to your own experience and maybe something that you have witnessed in others experiencing something similar, does such an experiences changes and does something with ourselves like immediately, or there's needed some time to that? Like for instance, how it was for your guilt where you lived?
Was it gone?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, is it Rilke who says, be patient with all the questions in your heart, live the questions, and someday you'll be blessed to discover the answer, In the stories, they're oftentimes a journey. Like in The Handless Maiden I told the other night, 7 years the king was searching for his beloved. And he vowed to neither eat nor go into a human house, nor comb his hair or wash until he found her again. And he journeyed for 7 years, right? And he became covered in dirt, and the birds made nests in his hair, and he was transformed. But it took time. It took 7 years for him to, which is a magical number. It's a metaphor, right? It's a cycle. Our cells, for example, take 7 years to completely renew. Now we know that scientifically, but they knew that in the fairy stories already. This number 7 is a metaphorical symbol of a life cycle, a journey. So it takes time. For these things to happen, for these transformations to happen. Yes, expectations, we want it quick. That's our culture, isn't it? Yeah. We have a goal and we want it to get there, as quick as possible. Take the straight road. But in the soul journey, there is no straight road. In the healing journey, there is no straight road. It's a meander, more like a river. It's a meander that moves its way slowly. It always comes to the sea, but it takes, kilometers. And twists and turns. Like in the labyrinth we were talking about the other day, where just as you're about to get to the heart of the labyrinth, you're the farthest away. No, of course my guilt didn't, the habit of feeling guilty didn't disappear right away. But something at the heart of me had changed, literally, in that moment. Something in the heart of me had changed so that I forgave myself. And that forgiveness, that blessing and balm of forgiveness that fully arrived in my being, partly because I stood up, had been physically with my body on that journey and physically stood up and said yes to this dream, right? So if we put that's one of the secrets, if we put our bodies and our hearts, our emotions, fully into this journey. We will be transformed. We will be shaped. And it takes the time it takes.
Yeah.
You can't rush the river, you know, it takes the time it takes. I was on my soul journey for at least 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so coming back to Animas Valley Institute and to this work that you're doing here, and already for fourth summer in a row you're here in Latvia.
Yeah, I love it so much, yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll come also next summer.
I hope so.
Yeah, can you a little bit maybe explain about this wild mind concept or idea that we are also doing here? As there already have been translated several Bill Plotkin's books in Latvian language, and many people are reading it, but it's not always to get out everything from a book, especially it's actually quite complicated thing to talk about. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Maybe you could tell a little bit what you find useful or maybe fascinating in this wild mind work.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, there we are with reading stories from books and oral storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, coming to a program is, I would say, that, you know, it's night and day. Reading the book is great for the information, but experiencing it through a program is such an amazing, embodied, full-bodied way of experiencing the different parts of us. So, Wild Mind is what we call a map of the psyche. And the beautiful thing about it is it's wholeness-based, it's resource-based. So much in our culture today is focused on the trauma or focused on the problem that wants to get fixed. There we are with the goal-oriented expectation, right? How do I make this problem go away? I'm suffering, you know, comes of course from the suffering we feel. But we shift focus, we shift consciousness, we shift focus from being stuck. I'm making this sign because it's based on the 4 directions, the compass. So my hands naturally go to the circle. On the compass, there is the inner circle is the fragmented parts, the wounded parts, the protectors, the strategies we've created in order to stay alive. Bless them, you know, bless those parts of us. And the outer circle is our facets of wholeness. And as you know, and the beautiful thing about this work is that it's wholeness-based. We learn the core move is how to recognize that we're in a wound or we're in a protective strategy and shift consciousness back to wholeness. And the fact of the matter is, the truth is, we have all of those 4 facets of wholeness in us already. It's like the earth is made of earth, water, fire, and air. We don't need to find the air. It's all around us. We don't need to find water. It's raining right now, you know? It's just there. Earth is always under our feet, you know. Fire we are in relationship with every day when we cook our food or we turn on the lights. And it's like that with our wholeness. All those facets of wholeness are within us already. We talk about cultivating them like in a garden, that we help support those parts of us become stronger, grow and flower and blossom in our lives. Yeah.
Could you a little bit elaborate and extend this thing about this core move as basically, yeah, so quite often we can see, I don't know, on Facebook or Instagram, you know, those ideas or suggestions that if you do not want to let Ukrainian war inside you, so then just don't read news. If you don't want to experience this or that bad things, then just cut it out of your life and cut it out this from your life and so on. Yeah, to some sort of avoidance. But as you're explaining this core move, this is something different.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So much of our response to life is that we want it to be different than it is. That's kind of the essence of suffering, right? We want things to be different than they are. We want to push away what's uncomfortable. We don't want to feel sadness or anger or be around people we don't like or hear news about the war. One sign of maturity is that we are able to hold more and more complexity, that it stops being about either or, good or bad, and we begin to understand a both and more relationship with life. And that kind of capacity to hold and withstand complexity requires our wholeness, requires our being in our resources and our wholeness. And so this move, this core move, is about returning to that kind of consciousness, as I said. And it's really very, very simple. But we have to know, we have to first find that place of wholeness within ourselves so we know what we're returning to. And so much of our culture is about the wound story, or the difficulty or the suffering. We focus on that, which is biological, in fact, because we need to be able to scan for danger so that we stay alive. It's how the human species has existed for thousands of years that we've existed. So there's something very biological about looking for the danger or the suffering or focusing on the problem. And we go ahead and go overboard. So this core move is, instead of having this tunnel vision on the problem, can I open my gaze? Can I widen my gaze and hold more than one perspective? Can I make space in my own heart? Like I was convinced I was guilty, and then I made space in my own heart. Oh, there's other versions of the story. There's other perspectives, right? Within me, there's other perspectives, and around me, there's other perspectives. You know, as we know from the Wild Mind map, all kinds of parts of us have all kinds of things to say. You know? So one way of doing that is to go to the core move, to move into wholeness, is to listen to what the voices are saying inside of us. One might be really scared, one might really be angry, one might know better than anybody else, one might feel guilty or worthless. And listening to all those voices, but not being taken over or run by those voices. Vanessa Machado de Oliveira says in her book, Hospicing Modernity, who's driving the bus? Check your bus, right? All those voices are totally welcome in the bus, but like a noisy bus with school kids, you don't want one of the kids driving the bus. You want the bus driver, the adult, driving the bus. So we could think about wholeness as, who's driving the bus? Is the adult of me, the most compassionate, loving, expansive part of me driving the bus? And again, we have to meet the bus driver in order to be able to do it. And then we come back full circle to reading the book or coming on a program are really helpful ways to meeting the bus driver. Recognizing when a child in us is going, ah, you know.
Yeah, well, you're doing this animus work already for quite years, more than a decade. Yeah, and maybe you could share a little bit from your own experience. What have been the most valuable changes for yourself that you have noticed for your own?
Well, I have to say the Wild Mind work has been the most transformative for my life in terms of my wellness, my capacity to thrive, my capacity to even follow the question of who am I and what am I for, and be in relationship with the world in a different way. I would have to say that Wild Mind has really been the foundation, life-changing thing that I have experienced at Animus. All of the programs have been, of course, amazing, but if I didn't have my resources and I didn't have my wholeness on board, I wouldn't have been able to go into the depths that I did. So this kind of practice of, okay, getting to know my wise one, my innocence and my humor, you know, in the East, and my indigenous belonging to Earth, and my feelings in the South, and my poet and my artist and my creative muse in the West, and this generative adult, this capacity to adult in the world for myself and others, you know. which are the 4 facets of wholeness in the North, I wouldn't have been able to do anything else with any true. It wouldn't have like had any traction. You know, none of the other depth work I did would have had a place to land inside of me, because I'd be tossed about by the waves of the ocean, of my emotions or my reactions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and the last question, yeah. So maybe what could be your suggestion for a person who is maybe listening this conversation and recognizing, well, yes, sometimes it is like that my bus driver is being hijacked by some of the kids. Yeah. What would be the first steps for this or those persons to do in order to get to know the adult one or the driver one, and help to find this exact front seat place for that person?
Yeah, yeah. Well, gosh, there's so many things. One would be obviously to go to a Wild Mind Intensive. There's online versions of that as well through Animist, not just in-person ones. So that if you can't travel, you can find it online. Reading the book, the Wild Mind book. There's the Council in the Commons. There's and Animist has a Mighty Networks platform where there's a lot of free resources. Working with mentors like myself or one of the other folks at Animist to help discover that. Yeah. And maybe starting with, how, all of that is maybe future things, but right now what people can do is for themselves, the core move, which is giving yourself a hug. We did this all week so many times, right? That you imagine the one of you who's hurting, upset, stressed, overwhelmed, angry, pissed off, blaming everybody else, feeling sorry for themselves. Really taking that one in your arms and holding them and hugging them and listening to them. Just like you would do to a small child who's having a hard time. That's the core move, right? That we can learn how to do that for ourselves. That we can listen to the stories that are alive in our own hearts from a perspective of compassion and love for ourselves. Imagine if Putin, and the president of Ukraine could do that, could hold themselves in their upsetness. If the politicians could do the core move and return to holding themselves when they get upset. Well, imagine what a world that would be. Imagine if parents could do that when they're stressed out for their children, with their children. Parents could hold themselves instead of yelling at their kids, right? Imagine if parents taught their kids how to comfort themselves and soothe themselves when they were upset, to notice their feelings. We'd live in a different world.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, yeah, so maybe this is a time for letting stories to be heard and stories to be told, and find out once again this metaphorical language in order to learn who is our bus drivers. Thank you very much, and till the next time.